James Marsden had fought through many battles, but the inner turmoil he was experiencing now was perhaps the hardest of all. Since leaving the military, James had been searching for a place of peace where he could immerse himself in the flow of normal life. Anderson's Diner, with its red oak walls and dim lighting, had once been such a place. He would come here every Saturday morning, sit at the corner table, and enjoy a cup of black coffee with a slice of garlic butter toast. Today, the atmosphere at Anderson's Diner felt strangely different. As James opened the door, the bell chimed to announce his arrival, and curious, bewildered eyes turned toward him. This was nothing new for James, but today, those looks held a different meaning, no longer mere curiosity about the man of color in the worn military uniform, but skepticism, even hostility. "Good morning, Anderson." "A cup of black coffee and toast as usual, please," James said in a friendly tone, trying to brush off the change in Anderson's demeanor. Anderson looked visibly confused, his gaze fixed on the apron in his hands. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he spoke in a cold tone James had never heard him use before. "James, I can't serve you anymore." Anderson's words hit James like a punch to the gut. He felt a sudden wave of dizziness. "Anderson, I don't understand. Is there a problem?" Anderson glanced around, his worried eyes as if searching for support from other customers. The fact is, some customers have complained. They don't feel comfortable with you here, because you're a person of color." For a moment, James felt the air around him grow a few degrees colder. He had faced discrimination before, but he never thought it would rear its head in a place he considered a second home. "And you, Anderson, are you siding with them?" Anderson avoided James's gaze, looking down at the floor as if the answer lay hidden among the old stains. "James, how can I stand against them alone? I have to think about my business." "Your business?" James asked, his voice tinged with sadness yet sharp. "Do you think that sacrificing what is right to appease a few racists will help your business?" Anderson fumbled, still unable to meet James's eyes. "I'm sorry, James. This isn't what I want, but it's the reality I have to face." James shook his head, his eyes filled with anguish and disappointment. "No, Anderson, you don't have to apologize to me. You should apologize for not standing up against what's wrong. You should apologize for allowing these prejudices to continue spreading in this country." Without saying anything more, James turned to leave, each heavy step witnessed by the silent patrons and the dim lights of the diner. He left behind the bell chiming once more, a definitive declaration that he would never return to this place, a place he once considered safe, now only a reminder of betrayal and pain. James Marsden stepped out of Anderson's Diner, feeling as though everything around him was changing. The fresh air outside couldn't dispel the sadness weighing in his heart. He sought a seat on a nearby park bench, a place where beautiful memories of peaceful mornings at this diner once thrived in his mind. Now, everything felt empty, as if a part of his soul had been taken away. As he sat down, James relaxed his body and closed his eyes, trying to find comforting memories to soothe the pain. Images of his days in the military flashed in his mind like a slow-motion film. He remembered the bright, sunlit afternoons at the base, filled with laughter and camaraderie. His comrades had stood together, overcoming hardships and dangers, sharing both joy and sorrow. "Everyone is equal," James told himself, recalling their promises during the toughest times. But now, in the midst of ordinary life, he was faced with barriers he thought had been buried. Suddenly, those memories were interrupted by a surge of anger and helplessness. He couldn't sit in silence, couldn't allow himself to accept that discrimination. James thought back to the times he and his comrades had participated in missions, standing side by side, regardless of the challenges. They had accepted sacrifices for one another, for a greater ideal, freedom and equality for all. Why now, in my own homeland, must I struggle once again for the most basic recognition? He pondered, the pain mingling with rising outrage. As he sat alone, a thought crossed James's mind. Did I protect my country, fight for everyone's freedom, only to return and face this discrimination? Guilt and helplessness overwhelmed him. He had sacrificed so much, and now he had to confront rejection in a place where he should have been welcomed. The more he thought about what had happened, the more he remembered Michael, his son. Michael had once looked at him with admiration, as if he were a hero, but now James felt he was no longer the role model his son needed. The image of Michael in a business suit, standing before voters with pride, weighed heavily on James's heart. He didn't want Michael to see him in this state, powerless, voiceless. When James lifted his gaze, he spotted families playing, children laughing, and elderly people sitting together. He couldn't help but think about the community's role in each person's life. Why were they silent when witnessing injustice? How could those he once considered friends and neighbors remain mute in the face of this? Did they understand the hurt he was enduring? However, not everyone agreed with Anderson's behavior. Complaints began to arise from several corners of the diner. Some patrons turned to one another, their voices laced with indignation and disappointment. Anderson deliberately ignored them, hoping the situation would calm down quickly. But the reality was quite the opposite. A tense atmosphere enveloped the diner. A simmering wave of discontent spread. "I can't keep eating here," a young man at a nearby table whispered to his girlfriend. "We shouldn't support a place that does this." The woman nodded in agreement. "You're right, that's shameful behavior." The couple hurriedly stood up, leaving their half-finished plates on the table. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor pierced the stifling silence. They quickly walked out the door, and the bell rang sharply as it closed behind them. "We don't need to eat at a place where kindness is scorned," an older man from the back table said to his wife, deliberately speaking loud enough for Anderson to hear. They paid their bill and left without a backward glance. The bell chimed once more when the elderly couple exited the diner, this time feeling like a clarion call echoing in this once familiar space. Anderson stood behind the counter, momentarily flustered, but trying to maintain his composure, reassuring himself that the customer's displeasure would soon fade. News of the incident at Anderson's diner quickly spread throughout the town, like a small spark igniting into a storm. Within a night, the story of Anderson's blatant refusal to serve James Marsden, a veteran who had dedicated his life to the country, became the hot topic in every neighborhood conversation. At the barbershop on the corner, where older men often gathered to chat, James's former comrades were discussing the event passionately. Their faces clearly showed outrage and anger. "He fought for this country!" an elderly man erupted, slamming his hand down on the wooden armrest, silencing the space for a moment. "And now, right in his own homeland, he is treated like this? It's unacceptable." But among all those who heard the news, there was one person who could not sit still. In Washington, D.C., in the solemn office of Congress, Michael Marsden, James's son and a prominent senator, sat frozen as he learned of the incident. A fiery anger ignited within him, burning like an unquenchable flame. His heart felt heavy as he envisioned his father, a man who had served under the American flag, fighting for the ideals of freedom and justice, being so publicly humiliated in his own homeland. Michael took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He knew he could not let anger dictate his actions. He had power, a voice, and the ability to make Anderson's diner pay for this, but punishment was not the solution he was seeking. "I won't just respond with anger," Michael murmured to himself. "I will respond with change." Michael pulled out his phone and immediately called his father. He hesitated for a moment before deciding to answer. "Dad, I just heard the news," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Michael, I know you've heard. I don't want this to become a bigger issue," James replied, his tone growing somber. "Dad, can't you take this seriously? You were denied service just because of your skin color." Michael felt anger surge within him. "This is an unacceptable insult. You sacrificed for this country, and now they treat you like this?" James was silent for a moment before speaking up. "I don't want you to use your position as a senator to start a fight. It will only make things worse." "Dad, I'm not trying to start a fight," Michael insisted, his voice becoming steadier. "I just want to push for positive change. We need to stand up for what's right. We can't let this injustice continue." "Michael, I understand what you're thinking, but—" James hesitated. "I just don't want you to get caught up in this controversy. It could harm you." "Dad, if we don't stand up, then who will? We can't let people like Anderson continue to exploit their positions to discriminate," Michael said, determination growing stronger in his voice. "But remember, it's important to do everything peacefully and equally," James reminded him. "I don't want you to go too far. I promise I'll be careful, Michael replied. I'll make sure everything happens in a way that people can come together to create change without conflict. I'm proud of you, Michael, but just make sure you always remember your ideals and never lose your compassion, James said, his tone softening. I will remember that, Dad. We will make this community better. That's what I want. The conversation ended, and Michael felt as if he was preparing for a great battle. After the emotional conversation with his father, Michael Marsden knew he needed to act swiftly. He not only wanted to draw attention to the issue, but also needed a practical solution, something that could truly change the situation. With determination, Michael began reaching out to community organizations and influential individuals he had known during his political career. One afternoon, Michael organized a meeting with representatives from nonprofit organizations, community leaders, and other veterans. He wanted to gather strength and ideas to create a clear plan for the future. In the tense yet exciting atmosphere, they began discussing what needed to be done. I think we need to buy Anderson's Diner, Michael proposed, his voice full of confidence. We can turn it into a symbol of unity and progress, a place where everyone is welcomed, regardless of their skin color or background. The people in the room looked surprised, but also excited. That sounds amazing, an older woman said, her eyes shining. If we can regain ownership, we can restructure the restaurant in a way that reflects our values. Exactly, Michael continued. We don't just want to buy a restaurant. We want to create a space for people to come together, socialize, and feel respected. A place where stories like my father's can be heard and honored. One participant, a veteran named David, stood up and said, "We need to rally support from the community. It's not just about money. It's about whether they will participate. We can organize fundraising events, community gatherings, and educational programs to raise awareness about discrimination and fairness." Michael nodded in agreement. Right. We can use social media to draw attention and call people to action. It's important that we show everyone this isn't just a project for a few people. It's a fight for the whole community. They began outlining a detailed plan, from finding necessary funding to redesigning the restaurant's interior. They decided not only to rename it the Veterans Home, but also to create an open space where people could share their stories, participate in cultural and educational events, and find a community they could belong to. After the meeting, Michael felt filled with hope. He had seen the determined looks on everyone's faces and knew they wouldn't stop until they achieved their goal. By purchasing Anderson's Diner and restructuring it into a symbol of unity, they could create real change. With that in mind, Michael began planning for a meeting with Anderson, the restaurant owner. He knew this would not be an easy conversation, but he felt it was necessary to confront him. He not only wanted to negotiate the purchase of the diner, but also to make Anderson understand the pain and outrage his actions had caused in the community. Michael sat down, took out a piece of paper, and began jotting down the key points he wanted to address in the meeting. "We don't just want a restaurant. We want a place where everyone feels welcomed and respected," he noted. "We will rebuild Anderson's Diner from its ruins, turning it into a symbol of change." He immediately called Jack, his assistant. "I want to buy that restaurant." Michael's voice was calm, as if he had carefully considered every step. Jack exhaled, looking surprised but not entirely shocked. "Buy that diner? Are you sure? What if he doesn't want to sell to you?" "It doesn't matter if he wants to or not," Michael said firmly. "We'll offer a price he can't refuse." Jack pondered for a moment. He had handled enough transactions like this before. "Okay, but we need to be prepared for some scenarios. If Anderson doesn't want to sell, he might ask for a high price or prolong the process to make it difficult for us." Michael nodded, his eyes darkening but unwavering. "I don't care how much he asks for, Jack. I want this settled quickly. We have to show him this isn't just a business deal. This is how we change the narrative." Jack thought for a moment and replied, "All right, I'll handle it. First, we need to check the legal status of the diner. Lease agreements, licenses, and any debts, if there are any. We also need to know exactly who owns the land. He might just be renting the space." "Get on it. I want a detailed report within 48 hours, Michael said, his voice authoritative. "And when you meet with Anderson, tell him I'm willing to pay above market price." Jack chuckled softly. "A price he can't refuse, huh? You're channeling a mafia movie here?" Michael smirked. Not the mafia, but justice. We'll do it the right way. No threats or intimidation. I just want to put an end to this story here and change the meaning of that diner. Jack contemplated for a few seconds before saying, I'll call you when everything is ready. Don't worry, Michael. We'll turn that diner into something the whole town can be proud of. Michael exhaled with relief. Thank you, Jack. I trust you. Back at Anderson's Diner, once a familiar destination for locals where families stopped by after church, workers sought a quick meal during their shifts, and older folks gathered to chat over morning coffee. However, after the incident with James Marsden, the atmosphere at the restaurant was no longer the same. As one entered the diner now, they could feel the heavy silence enveloping the space. The lively chatter that once filled the air had dwindled significantly. The diner, once bustling, now had only a few loyal customers quietly sitting with their plates of food and cups of coffee in front of them. Empty tables with neatly arranged chairs were clear evidence of the decline in patronage. At the cash register, Anderson, the restaurant owner, stood behind the counter looking weary. He tried to appear indifferent, but the quick glances toward the sparse customers in the diner revealed that he knew exactly what was happening. In the early days after the incident, Anderson had maintained a stubborn attitude, believing everything would blow over quickly. But he was mistaken. The community's response was stronger than he had anticipated. Regular customers had left, and new patrons weren't coming in. Some visited once, heard about the incident from others, and then decided not to return. Anderson realized his diner had been labeled a discriminatory establishment, and it wouldn't be easy to shake that reputation. Colleagues in the service industry around town had also turned their backs on him. Food suppliers began delivering late or no longer prioritized Anderson's diner orders as they once did. A few other restaurant owners, who were once friends of Anderson, skillfully avoided meeting him or no longer referred customers to his diner. Even the former employees were no longer as enthusiastic as before. Some had resigned, stating they didn't want to work at a place with a tarnished reputation in the community. The remaining staff worked reluctantly, only completing basic tasks without much concern for the customer experience. The restaurant's revenue plummeted. Daily receipts were not enough to cover operating costs. Anderson had to cut staff hours and was even considering closing early on weekdays to save on electricity and labor costs. But more than anything, the emotional isolation was what Anderson felt most acutely. He had once been a part of this community, a beloved and respected figure. Now, every time he walked down the street, he sensed the cold stares and disapproving looks. No one greeted him with a smile anymore. The bell rang sharply as Jack Thompson pushed open the door to Anderson's diner. The atmosphere inside was gloomy, strangely silent, as if every whisper of criticism from outside had quietly seeped in. Jack glanced around the diner, several empty tables, a few rare patrons quietly eating with their heads down, no conversations taking place. He walked up to the counter, dropped his leather briefcase on the surface, and sat on a high stool. Anderson looked up from behind the counter, his tired eyes meeting the stranger. He appeared wary, but tried to maintain an aloof demeanor, as if he had grown accustomed to the coldness of customers lately. Jack flashed a polite smile. "Hello, owner," he said in a friendly tone. "I'll have a cheeseburger, fries, and a cup of black coffee." Anderson nodded and turned away to prepare the order, not bothering to ask anything further. While waiting, Jack idly looked around the diner. The empty seats and heavy silence were clear signs that the establishment was struggling. When Anderson returned with the cup of coffee, Jack leaned forward over the counter, wearing another friendly smile. "I'm Jack Thompson," he introduced himself, extending his hand to shake Anderson's. Anderson hesitated for a moment, but eventually reached out, their handshake loose and somewhat reluctant. "Anderson," he replied curtly. Jack took a sip of coffee and continued, his tone light yet unmistakably straightforward. "I heard you've been having some trouble with this diner lately." Anderson squinted, his expression darkening. "I don't need advice from a stranger," he retorted defensively. Jack maintained his smile, calm as a seasoned chess player. "Not advice," he said. "A proposal." Anderson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised but still skeptical. "What kind of proposal?" Jack nodded, placing the coffee cup back on the counter. "I want to buy this diner." Anderson paused briefly, then let out a derisive laugh. "This place isn't worth much. he mumbled. "The town has turned its back on it. What do you think you can do with this crumbling mess?" Jack leaned forward, his gaze sharp yet composed. "That's why I'm here. I want to help you exit with dignity before things get any worse." Anderson crossed his arms over his chest, his shoulders tense, and bitterness evident on his face. "You don't understand," he said, his voice hoarse and heavy. "This isn't just a diner. It's my father's legacy." He paused, as if to emphasize the profound meaning of his words. "He spent his whole life building this place, and if you want to buy it, the price won't be cheap." Jack remained unfazed by the challenging words. He knew this was a decisive moment, where Anderson's pride would be the biggest barrier. "I understand that," Jack replied slowly, his tone calm yet weighty. "I know your father poured a lot of love and effort into this diner, and I also understand that what he left behind means more than just money." Anderson furrowed his brow, a mix of irritation and skepticism crossing his face. "So what do you think I should sell this place for?" Jack chuckled lightly, as if he had anticipated this question. "You can name your price. We're willing to pay above market value. I think you should save yourself some time because, with the current situation, I believe your diner will close soon." Anderson frowned, but he couldn't deny the truth in Jack's words. He knew that business was gradually fading. "Your father left a legacy," Jack continued, his voice warm but sharp. "He built this place with love and dedication. But right now, that legacy is under threat. If things continue like this, what you are trying to protect will only become a collection of broken memories." Anderson pondered for a few seconds, his eyes averted but clearly contemplating. He knew he was at a difficult crossroads, holding on to the diner with pride while accepting the community's disdain or letting go and retreating. "The price will be very high," Anderson said, but his voice lacked the firmness it had before. "Can you afford it?" Jack smiled confidently, knowing he had won the first round. "You name your price. We won't let you down." Anderson exhaled with relief, as if he had released a burden that had long weighed on his soul. "I need time to think," he said, his tone softer. He stood up slowly, not in a hurry, and reached into his suit jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek business card embossed with his name and contact information. "This is my business card," Jack said, his tone calm but friendly. He handed the card to Anderson with a light smile. "When you're ready, call me. We'll make everything go as smoothly as possible." Anderson accepted the business card, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of the paper. He didn't respond immediately, but his eyes reflected deep contemplation. Though still hesitant, Anderson knew this meeting could be his best opportunity to sell the diner before it went bankrupt. "Thank you for taking the time to talk to me," Jack said, offering a sincere smile before turning to leave. "I hope to hear from you soon." Anderson nodded slightly, still standing there, holding the business card, his gaze distant as he watched Jack walk out of the diner, the bell ringing sharply as the door closed behind him. It didn't take long for Anderson to decide to sell Anderson's diner. After long days of worrying about what had happened and the intense backlash from the community, just a short time after he had refused to serve James Marsden, he saw everything getting worse than he could have imagined. The community's outrage quickly spread, and his restaurant became the focal point of criticism. Social media posts flooded in, accompanied by protests outside the diner. Each time he saw the banners proclaiming, "We stand with James," it felt like a knife stabbing into his heart. His actions had not only hurt one person, but had also inflicted deep wounds on the entire community he had dedicated his life to serving. He had built Anderson's Diner as a refuge for everyone, but now he had become a symbol of discrimination. After everything that had happened, a feeling of guilt surged within him. He felt like a traitor, not just to James, but also to the values he had once upheld. "I let fear and pressure from a few others dictate my decision," Anderson pondered, his heart heavy. He couldn't explain why he had allowed the negative voices and narrow-minded prejudices of a few to affect his compassion. He had always taken pride in building a place for everyone, regardless of their skin color or background. But now, he realized that he had contributed to the very discrimination he once fought against. Sleepless nights passed by, with memories of the patrons who had once frequented his restaurant replaying in his mind. He had betrayed the trust of someone who had sacrificed for the country, and that made him feel ashamed. And so it was. 1 week later, James stood among friends and fellow veterans, his eyes filled with determination. He had decided to rename the diner the Veterans Home, a name that not only reflected his own history, but also symbolized unity and inclusion. As the opening ceremony began, an atmosphere of excitement filled the air. Applause rang out, filling the space with a new spirit, like warm waves of humanity. Anderson stood in the back, his heart overflowing with emotion. He knew he had contributed to something greater than himself. Each applause felt like an affirmation of the change that he and James had created together. Michael, James's son, stood beside his father, his eyes filled with pride. He sensed James's excitement, but within himself, he was also filled with hope. "Dad, I think this will be a great beginning for the community," Michael said, gently patting his father's shoulder. "We will write new chapters in this story together." James turned to look at Michael, his gaze filled with appreciation and gratitude. "Thank you, Michael. I don't know if I could have done this without you by my side." As the veterans began sharing their stories, laughter and connection spread through the air like a harmonious melody. They recounted memories from their military days, experiences that had shaped who they were. Images of comrades, tense moments on the battlefield, and joyful times spent together gradually emerged, painting a vivid picture of camaraderie and courage. "This home is no longer just a place that serves food," James told everyone, his voice trembling with emotion, "but a space for us to connect, to share, and to heal the wounds we have caused one another." Applause erupted again, but this time it was accompanied by enthusiastic cheers. "We will stand together," a veteran shouted, and everyone joined in a loud chorus. Emotion surged, like a powerful wave igniting the flame of unity within each person. In that moment, Michael felt the strength of the community, a strength he had never felt so profoundly before. He held his father's hand tightly, a small but meaningful gesture, as if to say they would face any challenges ahead together. As laughter continued to resonate in the space, James looked at Michael, seeing pride and love in his son's eyes. "I once thought I couldn't create change, but today, seeing these people, I realize we can." Michael smiled, his eyes shining brightly. "Dad, we have started a new journey. This home will become a place where everyone can find respect and welcome. Together, we will write stories full of hope and build a stronger community." Anderson quietly observed from the back, where the soft glow of the restaurant lights reflected on his face, making his emotions evident. He saw James standing amidst the crowd, his eyes filled with faith and determination. The applause rang out, accompanied by congratulations and shared stories, creating a warm and hopeful atmosphere. Every moment Anderson witnessed made him feel even more guilty about what had happened before. Memories of inner conflicts, worries, and fears he had faced surged back. He had once stood for the values that now felt like a betrayal. Seeing the veterans connect with one another, he couldn't help but ask himself, "Why didn't I see this before?" As the opening ceremony continued, Anderson decided it was time for him to leave. He didn't want to become a burden on this positive atmosphere. With heavy steps, he quietly exited the restaurant, his heart weighed down by thoughts of the past. Once outside, the cool night air somewhat alleviated the heavy emotions within him. Anderson walked down the familiar path back home, his mind still swirling with memories and feelings of guilt. He knew that selling the diner was not just a financial decision. It was a way for him to make amends with himself and with those he had hurt. Anderson sat alone on the sofa, but the thoughts in his head were like a storm. Although he had closed the restaurant, the quiet and stillness of the room only intensified the emptiness he felt inside. He rubbed the back of his head, trying to quell the tumultuous emotions rising within him. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of James standing amidst the crowd came vividly to mind, filled with hope and determination. "I've hurt someone like that," he told himself, his heart heavy. The guilt felt like a large stone pressing down in his chest. "I've betrayed the trust of that father and son, and of all the people who had come to Anderson's diner." Memories of old conversations, laughter from the patrons, and cherished moments during his time running the diner flooded back into his mind. He remembered inviting everyone to enjoy delicious meals, bustling evenings filled with music, where people could connect and share their lives. Those were moments he had once taken pride in. But now, all were overshadowed by the discrimination he had allowed to occur. Why didn't I stand up? Anderson wondered. Why did I let negative voices influence my decision? That question echoed repeatedly in his mind, like a sorrowful tune that refused to fade. He felt as though he had lost his way in the very values he had once upheld, and now he needed to find that path again. The dim room made him feel lonelier than ever. Each tick of the clock on the wall reminded him that time waits for no one. He needed to take action, but his heart was still filled with apprehension and fear. I can't keep running away, Anderson whispered to himself. I have to face what has happened. The night passed, and thoughts continued to swirl in his mind. He considered how he could contribute to the veterans' home, how to support James in restructuring the diner and creating a welcoming space for everyone. But the anxiety of whether the community would accept him back left him feeling confused. He wondered if they would have enough patience to give him a second chance. Anderson felt as if time was dragging on slowly, each second stretching like a century. He tossed and turned on the sofa, trying to find a comfortable position, but only achieving unrest in his heart. Finally, he decided to leave the sofa, stand up, and walk to the window. Outside, the streetlights twinkled in the darkness, reflecting the chaotic thoughts in his head. What happened can't be changed, he told himself, but I can create something better from now on. Anderson took a deep breath, feeling the cool air outside. He knew that to regain the community's respect, he needed to demonstrate sincerity and determination. Returning to the sofa, Anderson sat down and took out a piece of paper, deciding to write an apology letter to James. He knew that an apology had to come from the heart, and this was an opportunity to express his sincerity. The pen glided across the paper, and the words began to form, each line like a release of the emotions he had suppressed for so long. Dear James, I hope this letter finds you in good health and peace. I don't know where to begin, but I feel compelled to write these words to express my deep remorse. I was wrong to refuse you service at Anderson's Diner. That action not only hurt you, but also caused pain to the entire community that I have dedicated my life to serving. I let fear and pressure from a few others dictate my decision, and that is something I will never forgive myself for. You sacrificed for this country, and you deserve to be treated with respect and welcomed by those around you. Instead of standing up to defend the values I once believed in, I betrayed your trust. I can't imagine the feeling you must have experienced being turned away from the very place you considered safe. I want to say that I am truly sorry for the hurt I have caused. I am trying to learn from my mistakes, and I want to make amends. When I decided to sell the diner, it was not just a transfer of ownership. It was an opportunity to create a space where everyone can feel welcomed, regardless of their skin color or background. I understand that an apology cannot replace what has happened, but I hope you can accept the sincerity in my heart. I want to be part of the veterans' home and support you in creating an inclusive environment where the stories of all veterans are heard and honored. Please give me a chance to prove that I have changed. I hope you can forgive me and accept me as part of this journey. Sincerely, Anderson. The next morning, Anderson woke up early, filled with nervous anticipation. He had prepared the letter the night before, but now his mind was busy with thoughts of the upcoming meeting. Each moment seemed to stretch on endlessly, and Anderson felt as though he was standing before a large door, a chance to apologize and start anew. After having breakfast, he took the letter, carefully placed it in an envelope, and then drove to where James lived. As he pulled up in front of the house, a wave of nervousness washed over him. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure, then stepped out of the car. The bright sunlight shone down, but the atmosphere in his heart felt heavy. When he reached the door, Anderson rang the bell and waited, feeling as if time had stopped. After a moment, the door opened and James appeared. His face looked pensive, his expression thoughtful. "Hello, Anderson," James said, his voice low and somewhat serious. "Hello, James," Anderson replied, feeling a heavy stone weighing down in his chest. "Thank you for meeting with me." James nodded, a faint smile flickering across his face, but not enough to conceal the suspicion in his eyes. He stepped back to let Anderson enter. They sat facing each other at the dining table, the space between them filled with many emotions, from Anderson's remorse to James's doubts. After a moment of silence, Anderson took out the letter and placed it on the table. He didn't speak immediately, just looked into James's eyes, trying to seek understanding. James glanced at the letter, his expression curious but still wary. "I know I have hurt you," Anderson began, his voice filled with sincerity. "The act of refusing you service at Anderson's diner not only harmed you, but also caused pain to the entire community I have dedicated my life to serving." James remained silent, his eyes deep, as if he were pondering every word Anderson had said. "I let fear and pressure from a few others dictate my decision," Anderson continued, unable to hide the shame in his voice. "And now, I feel like a traitor." As James looked directly at Anderson, he could sense the sincerity in the man before him. "I betrayed your trust and the trust of those who have come here. I deeply regret it," Anderson said, his voice gradually becoming stronger. "What do you want to say to me?" James asked, unable to mask his skepticism. He needed to know if Anderson truly wanted to change. "I have decided to sell Anderson's Diner to create a new space where everyone can be welcomed, regardless of their skin color or background," Anderson affirmed. "I want to turn it into the veterans' home, a place where people like you can find respect and connection." James looked directly into Anderson's eyes, and his firmness began to soften. "If you are truly serious, then I will support you, but you need to show me that you have changed." "I will do whatever it takes to prove that," Anderson said, filled with determination. "I want to be involved in restructuring the diner, not just as a former owner, but as a supporter of the values this place represents." The meeting unfolded in an atmosphere of tension, but also hope. Anderson felt as if he had taken the first steps on the road to redemption. And in James's heart, flickers of hope began to emerge for a better future. "The important thing is that you need to follow through on what you say," James said, his tone lighter now. "I will need time to trust you, but if you genuinely want to change, I will be here to support you." "Thank you, James," Anderson replied, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I won't let you down. Please give me a chance to prove that I can do better." And in that moment, both men knew they were embarking on a new journey together, one that would not only restore a restaurant, but also heal the wounds in each of their hearts and in the community. Anderson stood up, feeling as though a weight had been lifted. The story of the veterans' home quickly spread throughout the town, and gradually, positive news about the new diner captured attention across the country. After Anderson, Michael, and James worked together to restructure the restaurant, they created a welcoming space where people from all walks of life could find connection and support. Anderson's transformation from someone who had fostered discrimination to a strong advocate for equality inspired many across the nation. Local media began reporting on the veterans' home, and stories of the restaurant's transformation quickly circulated on social media, drawing widespread attention. Many other restaurants began to learn from this model, organizing similar events and creating welcoming spaces for everyone. "We can learn from this story," a restaurant in another state declared in an article. "Change starts with the courage to acknowledge mistakes and the determination to correct them." The spirit of forgiveness didn't stop with Anderson and James. It spread throughout the community. People began participating in activities to support veterans, creating funds to help those who had served in the military. They organized art performances, fundraising for charities, and encouraged everyone to share their stories. In the following months, the Veterans Home became not just a place serving delicious food, but also a community center where people could find connection and understanding. James and Anderson tirelessly promoted their message of forgiveness and unity, turning the restaurant into a place where everyone could find comfort and hope. This story ends here. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the warm stories I put my heart into bringing to you. Your support is a precious motivation for me to continue this journey, and I am incredibly grateful to have you as part of it.